I used to think I just needed one more day to be ready, one more night of sleep, one more word of encouragement. But then one day I woke up and realized there was no more tomorrow for the one who keeps running. Have you ever told yourself, I'll do it tomorrow, I'll start tomorrow? I have many times. In the bedroom, in the car, in front of the computer screen, when my heart felt heavy as stone, but my mouth still smiled, because no one was allowed to see me tired. Until the truth hit me like a punch in the chest. There is no tomorrow, not in some cliche philosophical way, but in the raw, unfiltered truth. No tomorrow is coming to save you. No one is coming to pull you up. No perfect moment will arrive to make you feel ready. We don't procrastinate because we're lazy. We procrastinate because we're afraid. Afraid to fail. Afraid of judgment. Afraid that if we really try and still don't succeed, then what? I lived in that fear. I delayed my own dreams. I sacrificed the future for fleeting emotions. But then one question changed everything. If today were the last day you could live your dream, would you have the courage to start, or would you take it with you to the grave? You see, I'm not standing here because I'm stronger than you. I'm standing here because I finally stopped waiting. There was one thing I realized after years of living for others. The greatest exhaustion doesn't come from work. It comes from pretending you're fine while you're falling apart inside. I used to believe that if I were kind enough, patient enough, gave enough, then the world would treat me gently in return. But life doesn't work by the rules of symmetry. I was the one who always showed up. You needed someone to listen. I was there. You needed help untangling a mess. I rolled up my sleeves. You needed a shoulder to cry on. Go ahead. No one had to schedule. No one had to ask, are you okay? At first, I called it kindness. Later, I realized it was quietly abandoning myself. I never let anyone down, except me. Every time I said yes to others, I said no to sleep, to my real emotions, to the things I needed to do for myself. I didn't eat on time. I didn't breathe properly. I didn't speak up about what I needed. I lived in a loop of responsibility and expectation where people clapped because I was strong, but no one asked if I still had the strength to keep going. The problem wasn't that I gave. It was that I didn't know how to stop. I defaulted to being the team carrier, the fixer, the one who always had it together. And when you wear that label long enough, you start fearing the moment you let someone down. You begin to measure your worth by how useful you are to others, not by how connected you are to yourself. I remember one time, after a long day helping people, working through tasks, fixing other people's problems, I sat in my car, my hands shaking from exhaustion, and still told myself, just a little more. That was not strength. That was erasing myself. Do you know what the most dangerous thing is? It's when you become the rock for everyone else but have no foundation for yourself. It's when you wrap all your pain inside the words, I'm fine. It's when people admire you, but no one truly knows you're barely holding on. I used to think, if I don't help them, who will? But I forgot the more important question. If I collapse, who will help me? We cannot keep giving without being refilled. We cannot keep being the pillar without rest. We cannot keep smiling without space to sigh. I started to change, not because I was angry, but because I was too tired to keep living that way. I didn't want to get to the end of my life and realize I had been kind to the whole world except to myself. If you see yourself in this story, I want you to know one thing. Your kindness does not mean you have to trade away who you are. You don't need to be the hero for everyone. You just need to start by being an honest and kind friend to yourself first. I didn't realize I was burnt out until I started snapping at the people I love most. Not because they did anything wrong, but because I had been holding it all in for too long. I said yes when I wanted to say no. I agreed while my heart screamed, I'm tired, but I still did it, still nodded, still pushed through, and then one day I broke down crying in my car in a parking lot just because someone texted me, Jeff, can you help me with this? It was such a small thing, but it wasn't about that anymore. It was about the 100 times before when I had sacrificed, stayed silent, swallowed tears, just so I wouldn't let anyone down. Hear me on this. Kindness is a beautiful thing, but kindness without boundaries becomes a trap coated in the sweetness of validation, expectations, and the feeling of being useful. At first, you feel needed. Then, you feel drained. I used to call it living for others. Now I call it abandoning myself in the name of something noble. And the scary part is the world won't tell you when you've gone too far. Because if you always say yes, they will always ask. If you always nod, they will never imagine you once wanted to shake your head. No one is trying to take advantage of you. But if you never draw a line, no one will know where the line is. I started to ask myself, why do I feel guilty for saying no? Why do I feel like I need a reason to decline when others don't need a reason to ask? I realized I had learned to define my worth by how much I could endure, not by how deeply I was connected to myself. This is not an easy lesson to learn because it hits one of the deepest beliefs we were taught growing up. That kindness means never refusing. That love means always saying yes. But the truth is, love does not mean giving until you are empty. Real love has boundaries, has pauses, has intentional choices, not surrender. I remember one time a friend asked me, "Jeff, why don't you help out as much as you used to?" I smiled and said, "Because I'm learning how to help without losing myself. I no longer help because I'm afraid of letting people down. I help when I truly can. I show up when I can truly be present. And the magic is, I became kinder, deeper, more sustainable. Because you know what? Kindness without limits is not love. It's a quiet form of self-sacrifice wrapped in hurt feelings. And no one deserves to be the victim of their own kindness." Now, I want to ask you, have you ever felt guilty for saying no even when you were exhausted? Share your story in the comments. I want to read it. And I believe someone out there needs to see you speak your truth. I used to believe that real love meant never saying no. That if I loved someone enough, I could endure anything, the hurtful words, the cold silence, the unreasonable demands, and the feeling of being the only one trying in the relationship. I held on to so many connections, family, friends, people I once loved, by bracing myself. I thought that was commitment, loyalty, maturity, but it wasn't. It was the quiet trade-off of someone who hadn't yet learned how to love themselves. No one taught me that love without boundaries would become a burden to the one who loves. I thought I was sacrificing for love, but in truth, I was abandoning myself with every nod, every act of patience, every silent moment of swallowing pain. I lived as if my worth depended on how much I could endure, and if I walked away, it meant I wasn't good enough, not persistent enough, not loving enough. But that was a dangerous lie I had believed for far too long. The truth is, love does not need to be proven through pain. It needs space. It needs boundaries. It needs two people, not just one carrying everything, to keep it all looking okay. I once tried to hold on to a relationship just because I thought it was my job to heal them, but no one can heal someone who doesn't want to rise. And you can't keep reaching out your hand if every time you do, you sink deeper into your own sadness. I used to ask, if I leave, who will stay with them? Now I ask, if I stay, who will stay with me? That question woke me up from the illusion of a selfless love that forgot the self. If you no longer see yourself in the love you're giving, that's not love. That's disappearance. I learned how to love with my whole heart, but without losing my mind. I learned how to step back when the other person stopped stepping forward. I learned how to be silent, not out of fear, but because I no longer wanted to waste words on someone who no longer wanted to understand. And the hardest thing, the thing that finally set me free, I learned how to let go of someone I once believed was destiny. Not because I stopped loving them, but because I loved enough not to lose myself. That wasn't failure. That was growth. Growth is when you walk away from what makes you smaller, even if your heart still holds love. Growth is when you realize that love is not about holding on, but about holding the right person in the right way, while also holding on to yourself in the process. And when I walked away from a relationship that had swallowed me whole under the name of love, I didn't feel victorious. I felt light. Light because I no longer had to prove anything. No longer had to push through, no longer had to pretend things were okay when deep down I had already gone numb. True love does not ask you to abandon yourself. Real love does not require sacrificing your self-respect to survive. If a relationship demands your silence just to keep the peace, then you are merely existing in it, not truly living. There is a day I will never forget, not because it was special, but because it was the day I almost disappeared, even though everyone thought I was still alive. That day, I had just left a tense meeting. An irritated client, an indifferent colleague, a message from a family member that made me feel like I was always the first name they thought of when they needed something and the last name they thought of when I was falling apart. I walked to my car, sat in the driver's seat, closed the door, and in that quiet moment, the first thing I felt was not anger, it was not exhaustion, it was tightness. I could not breathe. There was no one sitting on my chest, no visible reason, but my chest felt crushed. I closed my eyes and tried to take a deep breath, but the air wouldn't go in. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there like someone who had wandered too far from their own boundaries, and now the body was speaking. It wasn't a panic attack. It was a final warning. I used to think I could carry it all. Thought a little rest would fix it. Thought if I could be just a bit stronger, push through one more day, please one more person, then life would calm down. But no, I had abandoned myself for so long that even breathing had become a luxury. That was the breaking point, no longer emotional. It was survival. I didn't need a vacation. I needed a radical change. I needed to relearn how to live, not through blind effort, but through conscious awareness that I too am a human being with limits. And the painful truth is, the world is not going to pause and ask if you are okay. They will clap if you perform well. They will assume you are fine if you don't speak up, but they will not stop to give you space to breathe unless you claim it yourself. So in that moment, in the car, I didn't call anyone. I didn't complain. I just admitted one thing. I had gone too far from myself. From that day on, I started doing one small thing. I gave myself 15 minutes a day just to breathe. No devices, no tasks, no pushing, just me, my breath, and presence. No one saw it online. No one praised me for it. But it was the first step that helped me survive. And then, little by little, I realized you don't have to collapse to be allowed to rest. You don't have to lose something to have permission to step back. You don't have to hit despair to begin choosing yourself again. Sometimes, the only thing you need to do to start over is breathe. But not the kind of breath that just keeps you alive. The kind of breath that comes from knowing you deserve to live fully. I used to think that letting go was a failure. That if I just loved hard enough, was kind enough, patient enough, then I could hold on to it no matter the cost. And I lived that way. I stayed. I held it together. I convinced myself that all it needed was just a little more, one more day, one more chance, one more forgiveness. But that little more never ended. It stretched on until I could no longer recognize myself in the life I was living. Letting go, to me back then, felt like a luxury, a privilege reserved for the weak or the careless. I wasn't one of them. I was the one who stayed, the one who didn't walk away, the one who fought, until one day I realized I had stayed too long in a battle that no longer offered anything but wounds. When you love someone, or something, to the point that you lose yourself just to keep it, what you call love has already changed shape. It no longer nourishes you. It begins to consume you, bit by bit. And over time, that blurs the line between loyalty and self-destruction. I know this may not be easy to hear, but sometimes love is not measured by your ability to stay. It is measured by your courage to walk away. Not because you stopped loving, but because you loved enough to know that if you keep going like this, there will be nothing left to love. No energy, no trust, no self. It took me a long time to accept that letting go does not mean losing. On the contrary, it was one of the bravest things I have ever done, because it required me to face the truth. No excuses, no blind hope. No comforting lies wrapped in beautiful words. I didn't let go because I was tired. I let go because I wanted to protect the last part of myself that hadn't yet been worn away. Someone asked me later, "Do you regret it?" I said, "No, I don't regret loving. I only regret that it took me so long to understand that love is not the same as self-destruction. I wish someone had told me sooner that mature love does not ask you to abandon yourself. It invites you to love the other while still respecting yourself." Do you know what hurts the most? It's not the goodbye. It's looking back and no longer recognizing the person in the mirror. It's knowing you tried so hard, you lost your identity holding on to something that had stopped being yours a long time ago. And then, when I finally let go, there were no applause, no recognition, no spotlight overhead, just silence. A kind of silence that wasn't dramatic, but freeing. And for the first time in years, I took a deep breath, and it didn't hurt anymore. In that moment, I knew I had begun to come alive again. Not with someone else, but with myself. One day, I decided not to reply anymore. No more countering. No more explaining. No more trying to clear up the misunderstanding. No more long texts trying to defend my reasons. No more saying, "I didn't mean it like that." No more saying, "I only did it because I just stayed silent." And in that silence, I finally heard something I had never dared to face. I had spent my youth trying to prove something to people who never wanted to understand. We grow up believing that silence means failure, being overpowered, or lacking an argument. But I learned the opposite. Silence is the highest form of self-control. It is when you know exactly what you think, feel, and believe, and no longer need anyone to confirm it for it to be real. It is when you refuse to step into the trap of arguing just to win, in a fight where the reward is not peace, but a bruised ego once again. I used to be the one who had to speak up, had to explain everything, had to show people I wasn't wrong, wasn't careless, wasn't cold, but the more I spoke, the more lost I felt. The more I justified, the smaller I became. And then I realized, when someone has already decided not to understand you, it doesn't matter how much you say, they will still hold on to the version of you they choose to believe. So I stopped. Not because I had nothing left to say, but because I no longer wanted to waste my energy on conversations with outcomes already written. I stopped responding to false narratives about me. Stopped trying to please everyone. Stopped chasing expectations that didn't come from my own heart. And in that silence, I finally began to hear my own voice. For the first time in years, I didn't have to shout to feel like I mattered. The silence I chose was not avoidance. It was not indifference. It was quiet resolve. A silent declaration that I don't need you to understand me in order for me to keep being me. It was letting go of the need to control how others see me in exchange for emotional freedom. And the truth is, the more you grow, the more you will realize that peace isn't found in how many arguments you win. It's in the ones you choose not to enter. I used to think reacting was a sign of strength, but now I know not reacting is the real strength. When you learn how to sit still through criticism, smile through provocation, and walk away from blame, it is not because you are weak. It is because you are strong enough not to need another petty victory. And eventually, you will understand. Silence is not emptiness. It is a boundary. It is a closed door. It is the loudest statement you will ever make without making a sound. I used to feel like I had to explain everything, like I needed a valid reason just to say no, like I had to apologize simply because I didn't have the energy to keep the conversation going. I used to force myself to write polite, gentle messages just to say one simple thing. I need a little time for myself. And even after sending it, I still felt uneasy, still felt like I had done something wrong. We are taught to be kind, but few people teach us that kindness does not mean always being available. It took me many years to understand that needing space, needing rest, needing to step back is not selfish. It is an essential part of emotional maturity, of being human. The truth is, you can't pour into others from an empty cup. You can't continue being a support system for others when your own footing is unstable. But the sad part is, society glorifies burnout. They praise it under the labels of commitment, dedication, always being there. And if you pause, if you say no, if you walk away, there will always be someone who feels uncomfortable. But here is what you need to know. You were not born to make everyone comfortable. You were born to live honestly and to survive. You don't owe anyone an explanation for needing to go to bed early, for needing a weekend without plans, for turning off your phone, for walking away from a conversation that makes you feel suffocated, for leaving a relationship that has turned into a harmful routine. You don't have to list your reasons. You don't have to prove that you tried hard enough. And you absolutely don't have to apologize for choosing peace over approval. I have been in rooms where my presence was the condition for everything to function, yet it functioned in a way that forgot me. I have stood in meetings, calls, and gatherings only to realize I wasn't truly present, just performing, playing the role of the peacemaker, the one who is fine, the one who always says yes. And then I started to pull back. Not loudly, not out of anger. I just stopped explaining so much, stopped writing long texts, stopped trying to make people understand. I let the silence do its job. It filtered the relationships that respected quiet, the people who didn't need you to always respond to believe you still cared, the people who didn't take your need for stillness as a sign of distance. We live in a time where instant replies are seen as proof of love. But do you know what real love does? It waits. It respects space. It steps back so the other person can breathe and be themselves. And if a relationship isn't wide enough to hold your silence and your temporary withdrawal, then it isn't safe enough to stay in for the long haul. In the end, this is what I've learned. I don't need to be accepted to have peace. I need to be free within my own limits. And those who truly understand me will get that without me having to explain it. The most beautiful relationships are the ones where you can disappear for a while, and when you return, no one asks you to apologize for taking care of yourself. I used to carry an invisible belief that it was my job to make sure everyone around me felt okay, that if someone was sad, disappointed, or hurt, somehow I had to fix it. I became the peacemaker in the family, the firefighter in the team, the one wiping tears even when I had none left to give. I carried other people's emotions like it was written into my name. And the strange thing is, no one ever asked me to. I signed up for that role myself with all the dedication and exhaustion it came with. At some point, I looked back and realized I had spent my whole life managing other people's emotions, but never once stopped to manage my own life. I lived in a constant reflex. Someone got angry, I calmed them. Someone got sad, I lifted them up. Someone grew quiet, I rushed to ask if they were okay. I thought that was love. But then I realized, when you are always the one fixing everyone's emotions, you are building a world where no one takes responsibility for themselves because they are used to you doing it for them. And the most dangerous part, you begin to believe that this is what you must do to be loved. That acceptance comes from always being fine, always smoothing things over, always taking the short end of the stick, until one day you have nothing left to give. No space to breathe, no opinions of your own, no energy to keep going. I started to change when someone I was once close with said to me, "You're not the safe space you used to be." That day, I felt like I had failed. But then I realized a safe space cannot be the only place that carries everyone else's feelings. A safe space also needs care, needs boundaries, needs room to heal. And if someone only values the version of you that is always okay, they don't truly love you. They're just leaning on you like a lifeline. I am no longer that lifeline. I am no longer everyone's shoulder. I started coming back, not out of selfishness, but out of honesty. I learned to sit with my own emotions without dismissing them. Learned to say, I'm not okay today, and I need a break. Learned not to rescue everyone, but to believe they can swim through their own feelings. That is not abandonment. That is trust in their healing and respect for my own limits. I returned to myself in small ways, writing a few lines each morning, listening to music for no one but me, turning off my phone after 9 p.m., saying no to gatherings I didn't really want to attend, and most importantly, I stopped apologizing for choosing myself. I chose me, not because I matter more than others, but because I had been the last name on my own list for far too long. And you know what? When I stopped carrying the emotional weight of the world didn't fall apart. But I, for the first time, stood on my own 2 feet. I used to feel like I had to say a lot, had to explain everything, had to justify my emotions, had to repeat myself until someone understood. I used to fear that silence meant misunderstanding. I thought that if I didn't speak, didn't explain, I would be left behind, seen as cold, careless, or lacking love. But after all the times I spoke too much and still got hurt, I came to a simple and profound realization. The more you grow, the less you need to say, because you begin to live in a way that no longer needs to be guessed. I started speaking less, not because I had something to hide, but because I no longer tried to make people understand a version of me. I chose to live truthfully and let my life speak for itself. I stopped forcing others to see my goodness, stopped chasing acceptance, stopped correcting every false perception. Instead of explaining that I was kind, I chose to live with kindness. Instead of saying I needed space, I took time for myself without guilt. The truth is, when you know who you are, you don't need to prove much. When you are grounded in yourself, you no longer rush to defend every misunderstanding. You don't need to raise your voice just to be heard. You walk into a room, not to be noticed, but to be present with intention. You communicate through your eyes, your posture, your calmness, and your clear boundaries, not through words that try to fill the space where insecurity used to live. I started observing more and reacting less, listening more and arguing less, choosing the right moments to speak, and remaining silent when words would change nothing. I no longer show up to win every conversation. I show up to protect my inner peace. And the strange thing is, when I spoke less, everything became clearer. The people who truly understand you don't need constant reminders of who you are. The ones truly connected to you won't require you to be right in order to deserve their love. And the ones who truly love you won't love you with their ears, but with the way they see you through the life you live. I no longer need everyone to agree with me. I just need to live a life where each morning I wake up feeling light. No emotional debt, no pretending, no bending myself to be worthy of love. I speak less, not because I have nothing to say, but because I have grown quiet enough to recognize what is real. And when you live truthfully enough, you don't need to say much. Your presence becomes the answer. There was a time in my life when I lived like I was taking an exam every day, an exam to be loved, to be accepted, to be kept in someone's life. I fine-tuned every word, weighed every decision, tried to please even those who never truly asked what I needed. I lived in an endless interview just to feel like I was enough. Then one day, I sat alone in a bright room, but inside I felt completely dark, and I realized the acceptance of others could never fill the void created by the rejection I had given myself. I had spent too long believing that my worth came from external approval. But real peace doesn't come from the number of people who cheer for you. It comes from whether you have the courage to be yourself, even if no one stands with you. Peace is when you sit alone, doing nothing, and still feel whole. Peace is when you no longer need anyone to understand you in order to stay true to your values. Peace is when you stop reshaping yourself to fit into someone else's mold. Peace is when you stop chasing the spotlight and start lighting from within. I once bent myself to keep relationships that no longer aligned. I once stayed silent just to keep the peace, smiled while feeling torn inside, apologized for choosing what was best for me. Lived through days of being accepted but never truly free. Then I chose to step back, not to hurt anyone, but to stop hurting myself, just to keep things smooth for others. I started living not for someone's approval, but for my own. To wake up each morning and be able to say, yes, I am okay. I am living truthfully. I began to say no without explaining, to say that's enough without drama, to create space not from anger, but because I love quiet more than half-hearted invitations. And the strange thing is, when I stopped seeking acceptance, I started being respected. When I no longer had anything to prove, I was finally seen for who I truly was. When I chose peace over noise, I entered relationships that were calm, where I didn't have to try so hard. Now, I no longer live to fit in. I live to be aligned with my values, my beliefs, my boundaries, and my own rhythm. I no longer shrink myself to make others comfortable. I let them walk away if they feel we no longer fit. Because peace doesn't come from keeping people. Peace comes from keeping yourself. I no longer need acceptance. I need peace. And real peace is never given. It is born the moment you stop asking for permission to live as your true self. If you've made it with me all the way to this point, it means some part of my story has touched a part of yours. And I want you to know, I deeply honor that. I'm not standing here as someone who has it all figured out. I am simply someone who once fell hard and chose to get back up. Someone who used to sacrifice themselves to hold on to things that were no longer worthy, and then learned how to let go, how to breathe again, how to live all over again. I don't know where you are in your journey right now. Maybe you're still carrying too much. Maybe you're hurting. Maybe you've already started returning to yourself. But wherever you are, please remember this. Peace is not a reward for the perfect. It is a right for those who choose themselves, even if it's just one small step at a time. Start with what seems ordinary. Say no when you're tired. Step back when you need to. Breathe before you respond. Stay silent instead of reacting. And from those small acts, you will begin to rebuild yourself. Steady and quiet, but powerful. You don't need everyone to understand you. You just need not to abandon yourself. You don't need to live to fit in. You just need to live in truth. And you don't need to be accepted in order to have peace. You need to choose peace, even if it means walking the opposite way. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for listening, not just to me, but to your own inner voice. And if I could leave you with just one thing, let it be this. Hold on to yourself before you try to hold on to anything else. I wish you strength. I wish you peace. And most of all, I wish you the courage to live true.